All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for those of you who are in here in person and you get to experience this live, but also good evening and thank you for all of those who are joining us virtually. My name is Michelle Horath and I'm the Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion here at the Harris School. I cannot tell you how overwhelmed I have been with this month's Black History Month events and activities. And so I really hope that you all have been able to participate in some of those. If you have not, they're online. So definitely look them up, enjoy them. And I think when you do that, my hope is that the talk that Reverend Moss will deliver this evening, it will all make sense to you. I purposely reached out to Reverend Moss to help close out Black History Month for us because we started out the month talking about social movements and how did we get here. And I want to end on this idea and this notion of hope and how do we collectively and individually move, kick that can a little bit harder down the street and start to make great progress. So I'm going to be incredibly brief. In fact, I'm about done because I want to bring on one of our amazing students who will do the introduction for Reverend Moss, and then we will enjoy the words that he has to say and provide us with this evening, and then we will have some time for Q&A if we can. And whatever Q&A we don't get to during this session, when we are done, there's a reception upstairs, and Reverend Moss will be around for a little bit, and so you can definitely reach out to him and to any of us. So with that, I want to introduce Mr. Roland White, who is a second-year MPP student here at the Harris School.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening, everyone. My name is Roland White, and I'm a second-year Master of Public Policy student here at the University of Chicago. I'm pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, joining us to discuss the power and future of social movements in the Black community, Reverend Dr. Otis B. Moss III. Senior pastor of the Trinity United Church of Christ here in Chicago, Dr. Moss is a preacher, activist, and author committed to community advancement and social justice. During the past 2 decades, Dr. Moss has practiced and preached a Black theology that unapologetically calls attention to mass incarceration, environmental justice, and economic inequality. This work reflects Dr. Moss's commitment to a prophetic message of love and justice, which he believes are inseparable companions that form the foundation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. A native of Cleveland, Ohio, Dr. Moss is an honors graduate of my alma mater, Morehouse College, and earned a Master of Divinity from Yale Divinity School and a Doctor of Ministry from Chicago Theological Seminary. He returned to Yale in 2014 to present the famed Lyman Beecher Lectures, which were the foundation of his 2015 book, Blue Note Preaching in a Post-Soul World, Finding Hope in an Age of Despair. Dr. Moss is highly influenced by the works of Zora Neale Hurston, August Wilson, Howard Thurman, as well as jazz and hip hop music. Additionally, the work and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the pastoral ministry of his father, Dr. Otis Moss Jr. of Cleveland, Ohio, have been primary mentors for his spiritual formation. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Dr. Otis B. Moss III.
First, I want to take this moment and say thank you to the Harris School for this invitation. To Michelle, thank you so much for this invitation, and to the Dean and to the President. I am honored. I'm honored, especially after you've had an amazing group of people who have spoken on this month. And usually when the last person comes about, that's like an after-dinner mint. So I just really appreciate you all allowing me to be on the menu with everyone else. Person who I was in school with at Morehouse, Eddie Glaude, Jelani Cobb, who I absolutely adore, his writing and his speaking, just brilliant individuals, and Mayor Nutter and others. I'm just very grateful and honored. And to my Morehouse brother for that introduction, We have a deep love for this unique institution on the red clay of Georgia in Atlanta, Morehouse College. And we thank you, and we're so blessed of the work that you're doing. And when I make my way down to the school again, I will let them know that Morehouse is being represented well at the University of Chicago. We also have some family, our Trinity family that is with us. I'm not going to name everybody, but for those who are connected, we call it the Village of Trinity. We're kind of like Bebe's kids. We don't die, we multiply. And I just want to ask those connected to this unique and wonderful village, if you would just quickly just stand. I just want to say thank you for being with us on this day. We just appreciate you so very, very, very much. Now, I've been given a task to talk about the power of social movements, to deal with the idea of love and of justice in this peculiar postmodern era and unique moment in history that America finds itself as we are teetering between, will we hold on to democratic ideals and move into authoritarianism? It's a strange moment. It's a strange moment for our country and our history, but in many ways not a strange moment. And I would like to begin really by lifting up who I would say was probably arguably one of the greatest cultural icons of the 20th century, a person by the name of El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, more popularly known as Malcolm X. At one time known by the name of Malcolm Little. Malcolm, who was raised in a household that revered a Jamaican Black Christian liberationist by the name of Marcus Garvey, and then eventually fell under the teachings of a person who resided here in Chicago by the name of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. It was Malcolm who became the prophet of Black self-esteem, and unfortunately was assassinated in the Audubon Ballroom in 1965. But his words and his deeds still echo in the halls of history and give inspiration to activists and spiritual leaders to this day. Now some who fall on the very conservative side may raise the question, why would I lift up a Muslim icon today at this moment? And I would say this is that truth is not exclusively held within Christian vessels, humanist frames or secular boxes, Jewish Torah or Buddhist practice. You see, I come from a tradition known as the Black or Africanized spirituality. This is not evangelicalism, nor is it framed by Western Christianity. My spirituality comes from a tradition older than Protestant movements, shaped by a democratic mysticism that sees the sacred imprint of God upon all humanity. And so that means that truth, that God is sovereign and has the authority to speak truth, whether coming from Malcolm X, Nipsey Hussle, or Kendrick Lamar. Whether you're grinding all your life, hustling and sacrifice, or if you're messed up, I'm messed up, but if God's got us, we're going to be all right. Either way it goes, truth flows from a variety of sources. And it is Malcolm who states, we declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in society on this earth, this day, which we intend to bring about by any means necessary. In other words, Malcolm is saying that the community will determine the methodology of transformation and liberation. It will not be the state, it will not be politicians, it will not be the status quo, it will not be the 1%, but the community has the answer in terms of what should be implemented in order to transform the community. And this is very difficult within the American context because we operate with such a hierarchy, in such a way that it is top down, that I know best for you, instead of sitting down within a community and finding out what can we do collectively together. And I believe that our greatest issue within this moment in America is an issue not that we frame within policy briefings, but the issue that we deal with, in the words actually of Albert Einstein, is an issue of imagination. Is that we lack the imagination to actually frame and envision new possibilities. Another way to put it is that we lack the moral imagination to be moral artists, to borrow from John Dewey, in reference to how we are to reframe this yet-to-be United States of America, to borrow from W.E.B. Du Bois. That we have to be moral artists. And that is what the social movements, especially within the African-American community, have been from the moment that we landed upon these shores in this place called North America. The first thing that must happen within the United States is that we no longer can live under Confederate and antebellum myths about our history. I'm really confused when people say that they want to make America great again. I'm really confused because my question is, I want to know what year are you talking about? You know, was that 1919? In the year that it was considered to be a bloody year for those people of African descent? Was it before women could vote? Or maybe it was, as one particular writer would say it this way, that it was America was not the home of the brave and the land of the free, but the home of the slave and the land of the thief. What year was it that you are speaking of? And that in order for us to be able to move into a new democratic future, in order for us collectively as a nation to build a beloved community, in the words of Dr. King, that we must face our history, face the tragedy of our history, but not fall into despair. That's really what blues musicians did all the time. Blues musicians are unafraid to face their existential issues, but they never fall into despair. Every blues musician will tell you, my baby done left me. But they're not going to die. They just said, my baby done left me. In other words, I've got to face the tragedy of my moment, but I will not fall into despair. In other words, I won't give up, but I'm willing to tell the truth of my history in order to salvage a new future for children that are yet to be born. That is the fundamental question if we are to build a new America, a yet-to-be America, and not fall into an antebellum Confederate myth of America. For the moment that people of African descent landed in this space we call North America in 1619, not in Jamestown, but in Point Comfort, Virginia, what is now known today as Hampton, Virginia, a trade in human flesh that eventually racialized human beings, something that was unique in American history. There had been slavery before, but not slavery that was racialized, that created a particular hierarchy, that this social construction that gave peculiar ideas that because of one's color, because of one's look, because of one's hair or nose, then therefore you are placed within a particular status. And this idea comes about because there was a social movement afoot. You had enslaved Africans, indentured Europeans, many of them who were indentured and poor, these people who operated out of a particular ethnicity out of Europe, along with indigenous people in America that began to see that they had some commonality. The enslaved African connecting with the Scot, who was not considered to be a European, or connecting with the Irish, who was not considered to be a European, connecting with someone from the indigenous community here, saying, you know what, the real issue is not us, but the guy who owns that big house over there. That if we come together, we can change this particular nation. Upon what was known as the Bacon's Rebellion, when enslaved Africans and those who were indentured got together, there were those who were the slave owners that said, we got to do something about this or we're going to lose our land. So we are not going to pay the indentured servants more. we will give them status. So this is what will happen. You are no longer a Scot. You are no longer Irish. You are no longer a particular ethnicity. We will now make you a racial category. And in that racial category, you will have privilege, but I'm not going to give you any more money. You at least will not be in the same category as the enslaved African, who we will then define as 3/5 of a human being and someone who is just specifically a color status. In other words, as David Roediger would say it, I will give you the wage of whiteness. So that literally your category, you leave your ethnicity and take hold of racial solidarity. It's very interesting that in America, you're a particular racial category. You go to Europe and they start asking you certain questions based upon your last name. But as soon as you come back to America, you get to fall into your racial category again. It's racialized in the way that we function in this country, specifically in order to protect the income of a very small group of people. My father put it this way, that slavery had nothing to do with theology, had nothing to do with politics. It first started out with economic profit. My father puts it this way. I love the way that he puts it, Roland. He says that when America recognizes that something is economically profitable, it will make it politically viable, then theologically acceptable. That it starts with economy, then with politics, and then theology. I like the way that Dr. King puts it. He says that theology becomes the taillight instead of the headlight. That your spirituality should shine a light, illuminate on the possibilities of how people can be fully human. But when it is subject to economy, when it is subject to capitalism, when it is subject to the market, all that is good is removed from it and becomes simply a tool in order to keep a certain group of people in power. That we have to face the truth of our history, but not fall into despair. That it was by 1860 that 80% of the gross domestic product of America was connected to this idea of the slave trade. That our economy was built on this idea that people love talking about America as being a superpower. How do you think we got to be a superpower? If I had free labor for 100 years, I'm pretty sure I could be a billionaire. Pretty easy, because we had free labor. And then you move into the period of Reconstruction. And what is fascinating about the period of Reconstruction is you're talking about some of our early social movements that refuse to fall in despair. First, of course, when we landed in 1619, you had from the Underground Railroad to what were known as the brush harbors and the hush harbors, what was known as the invisible institution of the church, which was a subversive movement specifically to allow people to be fully human in a space that said that you were only 3/5 of a human being. That's why people gathered together and worshiped who were of African descent. And it was always peculiar when we would gather because we spoke in a double entendre. We spoke in two different languages. The slave owner would hear black people singing and said, they're so happy. They're singing "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming forth to carry me home." But in reality, the double entendre of swing low, sweet chariot is the fact that when I'm singing "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," I'm simply saying that tonight I'm getting up off the plantation and I'm going home. And depending how I sing it, if I sing it with a bass, it means you better run south because the dogs are coming. But then you do remixes. I say, "Swing low, sweet chariot." Then all of a sudden somebody says, "Down by the riverside." That means the dogs are coming. Get to the riverside so they can lose your scent. Meanwhile, the slave master's like, they're so sweet when they sing. It was a double entendre. It was a social movement that was willing to face the blues, but not fall into despair, to see people as fully human. And then during the period of Reconstruction after 1865, you have the release of 4 million people people who had not been educated, people who had only been considered 3/5 of a human being. But what is absolutely extraordinary, what happens from 1865 and roughly to about 1888, people who had nothing within 20 odd years had 1 million acres of land. In 20 odd years had their first financial institution, actual bank. And then within 20 odd years, between 1861 and 1900, 90 historically Black colleges were built with pennies put together by people who were considered to be only 3/5 of a human being. Now, you can go see Marvel movies all you want, but to me, the real Avengers came out of the Reconstruction movement. These are some bad folk right here. That when you have literally nothing and then can produce what they were able to produce is absolutely extraordinary. But even in the midst of this, there was this backlash in America because there was deep fear that Black people would get with poor white people, would connect with indigenous people, would then connect with new immigrants that were coming to America and would form a coalition that would bring together what we know to be, in the words of Du Bois, the yet to be United States of America. And this backlash was extraordinary. Because even though that you had institutions like the First African Baptist Church that had formed was a part of the Underground Railroad, was one of the first ecumenical communities that we know of, the first independent Black church in the United States was a church that was formed, check this out, was formed by Muslim and Christians together. And they had in their basement places for people to hide so they could make their way north. Because if you even go there today and you look at the original benches, you look underneath them that they are written in Arabic, the names of the people who designed the benches. But how is it that in 1778, we had more sense to be able to connect with each other than we do in 2022? These kind of movements that were happening were absolutely extraordinary. Or even in this part of this church that was in Savannah, Georgia, the First African Baptist Church, they negotiated what were known as the Field Orders Number 15, better known as the 40 acres and a mule, that literally along the coast of Georgia and South Carolina was going to be free territory where these 4 million Africans would be able to farm because they were experts in farming, and they would be able to produce for this developing colony and nation. But there was such deep fear during this time period. So something was instituted, I think it was around 1871, was this particular group that said that they wanted to make America great again. It was called the KKK. You think I'm joking? No, they really did say we want to make America great again because they were concerned, again, that these groups of people of color might build a coalition with other people and may change the course of this nation. And so they even got with a propaganda program. Before there was the internet, they got with a propaganda program from D.W. Griffith, and they were able to be part of a film known as The Birth of a Nation, where the Ku Klux Klan was the hero in the story. America's homegrown terrorists became the stars of the movie. And then as a result of that, laws were then passed in this country. The laws known as peonage, better known as the vagrancy laws. The vagrancy laws, especially in the South, re-enslaved roughly about 500,000 Black people after Reconstruction. And that re-enslavement was better known as sharecropping, peonage. The vagrancy law said this: if you are a Black person anywhere walking in your community, you must show your papers. You must show that you work somewhere. And if there are 2 or 3 of you, you do not have your papers, then we can immediately put you in jail. When you're put in jail, because of course, you're lazy people, even though you've been working 200-some years for free, you're lazy people. Therefore, we're going to put you in jail and you're going to have to work off your time. So the South was rebuilt by this peonage system where people were then sold to companies, roughly from 1885 all the way, check this out, to 1972. This continued in the United States. And so it was schools of social policy, not University of Chicago I know of, but there were schools of social policy that specifically, I know one up in the Northeast, Harvard, that raised the question that said, well, you know, since there's so many statistics say so many of these people are going to jail, then therefore there must be something wrong with them morally. So then you begin the first, what we know as criminal studies, framing Black people and Black bodies as something as other than, which then allowed people to create other policies. Well, then if there's something wrong with them, then we must make sure that they're segregated from everyone else. And Chicago was really good at this segregation. We love to talk about it in the South, but Chicago was the pinnacle of segregation. Why do I say it was the pinnacle of segregation and not Alabama? Because of the FHA, the Federal Housing Authority, made sure that you could not get a loan here in Chicago. And if you wanted to have a house, you had to have a contract house, meaning you couldn't buy it, but you signed a contract to live in it. And guess what? Your rent ballooned just about every month because the idea was not to keep you in the house. The idea was for you to lose the house so that I can reclaim it back and then sell it back to someone else on this particular contract. Right here, right over in Lawndale, in places in Inglewood, on the west side, they had perfected this way in order to keep people out of homes. The number one way in which people built wealth in the United States was not because they owned land, was because they owned a home. That's how people built wealth, and they passed it on. And so you have these systems that are put in place, and then you have such things as the war on drugs. But yet, there are these movements that keep developing, fighting against that. Whether it is Ida B. Wells, one of the most brilliant people who everyone, I believe, should study. This woman who was recording lynchings all across the South. Or maybe you want to talk about a person by the name of A. Philip Randolph, who is organizing Pullman Porters. We still have to talk about Chicago and the Pullman Company. Well, there you may even go down to Alabama, to Montgomery. And probably a person you've never heard of, a woman by the name of Joanne Robinson. We love to talk about Dr. King, but the real person who organized the Montgomery Improvement Association and the Montgomery movement was Rosa Parks and a woman by the name of Joanne Robinson. Joanne Robinson was a bad sister. She ran the women's political movement in Montgomery. And there at a meeting one night, the men were arguing whether or not they were going to start a boycott. Joanne Robinson and her crew left the meeting. They went and had another meeting and said, we're going to start a boycott. This is what we're going to do. Find the mimeograph machine. We're going to make 50,000 copies. When everybody wakes up, they are not to ride the bus. When the brothers got out the meeting and went to bed and woke up the next morning, they found out that there was supposed to be a movement that they were supposed to be leading, so they jumped in front so they could lead the movement. But it was really some sisters that did the whole thing, that we sometimes forget that the sisters actually started the movement in the first place. So you have someone like a Joanne Robinson who takes it upon herself boldly to push those who are afraid to take the step. And then a young 26-year-old graduate of Morehouse College is put out front, not because they thought he was the most brilliant, but he was the one who was the newest person in town and didn't have any enemies yet. And they said, we want you to lead because nobody really knows you. And the rest becomes history. But we still have this continual backlash because there has been deep fear around the organizing, especially among people of African descent, because we have the ability to look at the blues and not fall into despair. And anytime there is a social movement that Black people are a part of, it always benefits everybody else. For example, during the period of Reconstruction. Now, I'm pretty sure everybody here at some point went to grammar school. Maybe some of you were homeschooled, but many of us probably went to grammar school, went to a public school. The public school system was formed by formerly enslaved Africans. A representative in South Carolina by the name of Robert Smalls is one who put forth some of the legislation that we now know for the public school system, because they were trying to figure out, how will we be able to educate formerly enslaved Africans? But we're not just concerned about them. We're also concerned about everyone else in the nation. Just as we're talking about voting rights and Joanne Robinson, it's not just about us. There's always a benefit to everyone else in the process of these movements. And if today, if we are able to listen clearly to the BLM movement, it is a benefit to everyone if we are able to reimagine what public safety, or I like to say it is better this way, what public health looks like. We need to stop framing it from the perspective of criminalization, because as long as you frame it solely as criminalization and criminal policy and public safety, you miss out that it is a public health issue. For example, we call 911 for everything. You know, dog in the tree, somebody get off my lawn, you know, everything. When in actuality, in other spaces, there should be a number that you call for people who have mental health crisis. You should not call an armed officer for anyone having a mental health crisis under any circumstances. And we have created a system that now benefits a small group of people, where people even campaign on law and order. And it's fascinating to me, this idea of law and order. Because it was Nixon who was the one who really put forth this war on drugs, but at the same time also wanted treatment at the same time, because they recognized, when he looked at some of the stats, he said, well, most of the people doing drugs look like my cousins. They don't look like the people that we have been framing. So it's very fascinating that now we talk about the opioid epidemic. Because when we talk about the opioid epidemic, you do not see a black face. And all of a sudden, it becomes about treatment. How can we ensure that this person thrives and grows? It becomes public health. As soon as someone says crack, all of a sudden, put them in jail. They're dangerous. We move our framing because we still operate with an antebellum Confederate frame in terms of public policy and in terms of our imagination. America lacks the imagination. It is imagination that will transform us. It is imagination that will put us in a completely different frame. And today, there is a need and a necessity to reframe how we do work. I like to say it because I began with Malcolm X. He said, by any means necessary. I've done a remix of Malcolm and talk about by any greens necessary. So what is by any greens necessary? It means that's what we are actually doing at Trinity United Church of Christ, by any greens necessary, in terms of transforming our little small turf on the South Side. So there, right on, I invite you to come out there. On the South Side, we have one of the best libraries in the city of Chicago. It's the Carter G. Woodson Library. It has the largest collection of African-American literature in the Midwest. If you are doing your dissertation on anything Black, you're going to have to go to the Carter G. Woodson Library. The Vivian Harsh collection is absolutely extraordinary. If you want to see some of the letters of Ida B. Wells, they're there. If you want to read some of the work of Gwendolyn Brooks and letters that she wrote, they're right there. If you want to see the letters that Du Bois wrote to people in Chicago, they're right there at the Carter G. Woodson Library. The Carter G. Woodson Library was falling apart. It had a scaffolding on the outside because the city of Chicago, I guess, got the wrong contractor, and they were afraid that the bricks were going to hit people on the head. So they put a scaffolding out there to keep the bricks from falling on people. The building was falling apart. And the scaffolding had been out there so long that people assumed that it was a part of the architecture. We realized that the building was falling apart, and we had one of the jewels of this city sitting right out on the South Side. So our Community Development Corporation, along with other groups in the city of Chicago, came together and we said, hey, we want to meet with the Library Commission, that we want to we want to see this library rebuilt. And then they told us, they said, well, that's really nice, but we don't have any money. But our CDC did the research and said, well, let's look on the north side how many libraries you built. Let's look and see how many libraries you renovated. We said, here are 5 brand new libraries that you were able to spend X amount of dollars to build. Why would you not put resources into the largest collection of African-American literature in the Midwest? They said, oh, well, we still don't have any money. I said, no problem. So we got up to leave the meeting, and I said, oh, please tell me, as soon as we were walking out, when's your next Library Commission meeting? I said, oh, we have one next week. I said, thank you very much. We'll see you later. So Sunday, I got up in the pulpit, and I asked the community of Trinity that there's a Library Commission meeting coming up. We would like for you to show up. Now, you must know that no one goes to a Library Commission meeting unless you're like into the Dewey Decimal System or something like that. No one goes there. So I kid you not, the Library Commission meeting, it was over at 7:59. I got a call at 8:01. Reverend Moss, can we meet with you? Sure, we'd love to. Heard that there were like 400 people showing up to the Library Commission meeting. And they were asking one question and one question only about the Carter G. Woodson Library. So we meet with the Library Commission. They're like, you know what? We want to let you know that we found a grant for $10 million to redo the library. I said, that's wonderful. I said, we're just so glad you brought this to our attention. I said, so we're gonna rebuild the library. I said, well, that's nice, but that's not good enough. If you're gonna rebuild this library, the people who rebuild it will be people from this community. There will be a Black contractor, but you will not just be a Black contractor. The people working on the library will be those who come out of the mass incarceration system. It will not just be those from the mass incarceration system. Then it would have to be a green design. And the city said back to us, we've never seen anything like this before. And we said, well, Trinity United Church of Christ used the same framework when we renovated our church. We used people coming from the mass incarceration system. We used Black contractors, and we did a green design. Even got a green roof sitting up there, bees buzzing around all up top of the church and everything. And I said, if a church that doesn't have the budget of a city or resources of a city can do it, why can't the city? So long story short, they eventually did those particular things of creating that kind of community benefits agreement. And as a result, the Carter G. Woodson Library is the only library in the city of Chicago that specializes in dementia and Alzheimer's for people who are caretakers of loved ones who deal with that. Brand new video and audio facility. So if someone wants to go into music or you want to do your podcast, you can do it right there. And of course, that beautiful Vivian Harsh collection has been taken care of, where people from all around the state come and do study. That's by any greens necessary. Recognizing it's going to be green, it's going to be Black, and it's going to release people who have been in the mass incarceration system, because we are part of this fundamental social movement that began when Africans landed on these shores in 1619 in Point Comfort, Virginia. That when we do the work, it also benefits everyone. Everyone. And this is the framing that I believe if we are to build a new democracy, that we've got to face our history, that we have to have a creative way in doing community development, and we have to recognize that when we work collectively together, we can play new music together that we've never played before. As Roland mentioned, I love jazz music. I'm a jazz fan. I'm a hip hop fan, all of that. I love that music. Don't hate. I love it. I love it. And one of the things about jazz is uniquely democratic. It is uniquely American because it's one of the unique American cultural creations, because it's designed in New Orleans, Louisiana, which I think is one of the most American cities on the planet. In New Orleans, just in one section of New Orleans, you may have 34 different accents in New Orleans. There's no music like New Orleans, and there's no food like there is in New Orleans. For those of you who haven't been to New Orleans, please put it on your calendar at some point in the near future. But it was those freed Africans from Haiti who came to New Orleans. And when on Sundays, when they heard the sounds in the Congo Square, the space on Sunday where Africans were allowed to gather together, those Africans heard the sounds of indigenous Americans. They heard the sounds of those who were Spanish and French and also German. And they were able to create a new music that is uniquely democratic that we know as jazz. Jazz is democratic music. Why do I say it's democratic music? Jazz teaches democracy to America before America even knew what democracy was all about. Because what's unique about jazz is that everybody in the jazz band has the right to solo. Everybody can utilize their own particular cultural gift and give an expression and contribution to the band. For example, what I love about jazz, unlike any other music, you see each instrument can sound like itself, but at the same time, these instruments are not supposed to play together. The saxophone was designed for the marching band. The piano was specifically for those classical European structures and music. The trap drum set was to be played not with African polyrhythms, but with a simple marching sound. And the bass was to be played with a bow, not your fingers. But when the jazz band came together, each instrument had the right to solo. But what is beautiful about the solo is you never hear the saxophone telling the piano to sound like me. You never hear the piano telling the drum to sound like me. You never hear the drum trying to tell the bass you must sound like me. Everybody has the right to solo. In other words, wherever I come from, my voice is just as important. I may not have the same background as you, but I can play in the band and we can create some new music. And that's really what democracy is all about, is that you and I, when we come together and you bring your unique narrative and play in the band, new music comes about in the process. And if we allow each other to solo, in the words of John Coltrane, we will be able to create a love supreme. Something beautiful can happen in the process when we dare play in the band together. And we use a new framing to transform our communities. A remix from Malcolm, when we dare to utilize by any greens necessary. Thank you very much.
Okay, nothing I'm getting ready to say will come even close, even close to that. It is, I think we have time for maybe one or two questions, and then we will wrap up, and then we will head upstairs. I think one or two questions, all right?
That'd be fine.
So if there's anyone in the audience who has been thinking about if they've got a burning question that you are just dying to ask Reverend Moss, just raise your hand. Yep, go ahead.
You said talk the theological side? Oh, surely. American Christianity is not Christianity. It is capitalism in ecclesiastical garments. That's the way I see American Christianity. And so it has always been captured by the market, and it has also been captured by whiteness. And so my friend Jim Wallace, who is the founder of Sojourners, he said, in order for me to be Christian, I have to exercise my whiteness, because my whiteness always gets in front of Jesus, and therefore I can't follow Jesus because I'm too busy being white. And so that is the kind of, I think, the exorcism that must happen in America in reference to the faith tradition. So much of what we see in this white evangelicalism. There's a great book called Jesus and John Wayne. It's fantastic. And the writer was talking about that the John Wayne-esque Jesus that is not really a Jesus that America's comfortable with but cannot deal with the liberation, focus on the poor, serving kind of Jesus, because it does not fit the idea of empire, colonization, nor segregation.
One more question? Yes, go ahead.
How do we encourage policymakers to develop the sort of creativity that comes with jazz and blues?
That's a great question. First off, I would hope that the graduates of this school would kick out some of the policymakers that we have, all right? Honestly. I think that is the first way, because I don't think some of them have the capacity. They lack imagination is our problem. It's not resources. It's not learning. It's imagination. Albert Einstein says, I would rather have a person with imagination than a person with genius, because imagination will always destroy the box and create something new. The genius will keep working in the box and show you how smart they are. And so I think it's important that we replace some of the policymakers, create some new policy think tanks. And here's the thing, many politicians, when they started, I'm not talking about any particular, but many times politicians, especially when they start in the local level, first of all, they don't read. Second of all, someone sees them and they utilize them to promote their agenda. So they use them as a blank slate, say, you know what, hey, I know you don't have time to read. We'll do the research for you. It's fascinating to me that for example, let's use the NRA as an example. The NRA was focused on something called hunting for a long time, until they got connected with gun manufacturers, and they aligned themselves together, and the NRA is simply a lobbying group to protect gun manufacturers. How can we make more money? So we have a law that says I can't sue a gun manufacturer, which is crazy, because I can sue a car manufacturer. If they do something and the car is not safe, I can sue the manufacturer of the car. But we actually have a law that says I can't sue a person who makes a weapon to kill people from a distance. But I can sue a car maker or any other maker. I can sue a coffee maker because the coffee's too hot. But we can't do so. So I'm saying is the lack of imagination, the creation of new think tanks, the necessity of people to run who are willing to delve into the policies. And everybody at the Harris School need to kick out all these other folk who are running around here, okay?
Okay, I think I'm actually going to ask the absolute last question. You spoke a lot about this power of the collective being comprised of individuals who all have a role. Why do you think BLM or Black Lives Matter movement has moved beyond just issues in this country? There, countries abroad or places abroad had as large a protests as we had here. Why do you think that is so?
Oh, that's a great question. Because I believe that BLM resonated with so many people globally because of the idea of oppression. BLM was able to frame the blues in such a way that people were able to hear the song across the world. That's what BLM was able to do. So one of the things that fascinated me, I believe it was in Syria that someone had created some graffiti, which is art, by the way. I want you to know that, real graffiti artists. Graffiti that said BLM, but it had an amazing picture of George Floyd in Syria, because they were also connecting their issues of oppression to what had happened in the United States. And then if you remix it, what's so amazing is that the BLM movement is then started by Black women, is also another fascinating thing. And so there is, I believe, this collective yearning globally to have voices and to give voice to the challenges. So in Australia, our Aboriginal sisters and brothers are connecting with it. Whether you're in Brazil or Peru, I mean, you just go across the globe. And this is something that continually happens in human history, especially with the advent of being able to share information so very quickly. That's one of the good things about the internet. That's a whole nother lecture about the internet that I have. I have a real issue with some of the companies, specifically Mark Zuckerberg and some of the people who have some issues around this. There's some other things, but that's a whole nother conversation. But yes, absolutely.
Okay, I will follow up upstairs because I'd love to hear your thoughts about, is it about race or is it about humanity?
It's both.
It's both.
Always both. Yeah. It's about, can we, here's the thing, for America is afraid of people moving to ethnicity. You see, as Black people, we speak of being Black as ethnic and also racial. It's interchangeable. And when people of color are in the room, white people get to be white. When we all leave, then all of a sudden they're like, "Are you German?" It's like, well, it's like, you get your ethnicity back. If America becomes ethnic, that's what they were afraid of in the 1700s, that ethnic white people would recognize the commonality with people who were from Dahomey and Yoruba and all of these places. And that's dangerous because ethnicity has history. Ethnicity has story. Ethnicity has food. See, there's no white food, it's like, but there is German food and Scottish food and Irish food. There is, ethnicity has a story, and we can find commonality in the story. Race doesn't. It's a story that someone else writes for us. But when I'm Black ethnically, and then I connect with someone else and their ethnicity, we start sharing our stories. We start talking about our grandmas. We start talking about what they made. We start talking about the sayings they had. And all of a sudden, we find a commonality at that moment. The ethnicity is power because in the ethnicity is your story. Race is different because it's a narrative that's controlled by someone else that we're always fighting against.
Okay, so once again, I'm getting ready to say something that won't compare to that, right? So I am going to invite Grace Oxley, our wonderful second-year MPP as well, to come up and close us out.
Hello, everyone. Hi, thank you. My name is Grace Elizabeth Oxley. I'm a second-year MPP student here at Harris. I'm an Obama Foundation scholar, and I have the pleasure of being the president of BAPS, which is Black Action in Public Policy Studies. Okay, thank you. Really, it's a Harris student organization that works to uplift Black policy issues that face people across the globe. So can everyone join me in thanking Reverend Moss again for being here with us? And on behalf of Harris and everyone here today, we'd like to present you with a gift. It's a collection of small items from Harris, so some memorabilia and a collection of books from speakers who attended, who spoke at all of our Black History Month events this month. So this is for you. And then really, that's really the end of the event. We'd like to, of course, thank the audience. We know you could have been anywhere tonight, but you chose to be here with us to hear Reverend Moss speak. And we'd like to just thank you for coming and invite you upstairs to the reception. Have a good evening.